Welcome back to central Germany, the state of Thuringia, where the composer Johann Sebastian Bach was born. And today, on the Eberspecher FIL Luge World Cup, we'll look to compose an exciting finish. Should be a dramatic one for the conclusion of this doubles competition. Hi everyone, I'm Tim Singer on a 19-degree day, Fahrenheit. By far the coldest of the season, and it has yielded fast times. In fact, track record times earlier today in men's singles, and then just before in run number one of the doubles event. 950 meters on a newly renovated track. As we get ready for run number two, I'm pleased to bring back once again from Team USA, 2018 Olympian Emily Sweeney. Welcome back, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. We saw a lot of interesting lines in the first run. The top three. Well, first of all, we should say the fourth position is these guys only have 1,000 ahead of the sled right behind them. Then we move into the next two, the Six brothers. They really surprised me in a great way to find all the speed they did in the first run, and then finally we have the Tobys. This is them finding their vindication after a very poor result in the first World Cup that they had at this track, so they're on a great road as well.
That's right. This is the second of two. This is actually a shift from what was originally scheduled to be a Lake Placid New York World Cup, but the North American events were moved over to Europe, as were the Asian events. Master Turteman back in 11th place. The Canadians are in the top 10. And as you see, they count them down. And as Emily was referring to, look at Stoy Kohler, number 21 position, just 1,000th of a second out of the podium at the moment. So expect a lot of drama here in run number two. We kick things off with the young Ukrainian team, Mikievich and Babura. And when I say young, I am talking 15 and 16 years old. They had a bit of an adventure in run number one, Emily.
They did. That's an understatement for these guys. They had a lot of big mistakes, basically from top to bottom. So really early entrance in a start curve, but for them, they really are just gaining experience and hopefully can clean up some of the mistakes that they had in the first run.
Doubles run, or all World Cup luge for that matter, 2 heats, combined time competition. And they have the same issue as they had in run number one, but a much quicker recovery.
Right. I mean, they had a late entrance into 7, a big skid. There's a start that actually enters the curve there, so there's a lot of room, and they're over. Oh, almost. Never mind. Now
and over again. 3 times the charm. At the top, in the middle,
man.
and at the bottom. And they're going to struggle to get a finish time here. They're back on the sled. The finish line is just around this corner, so they get there. Although the outrun will be a bit of a challenge.
Right, and that's tough. I mean, hopefully they'll, it's a tough spot to be stuck at.
And they made it.
They did. Man, I mean, all of that started in curve 7, but here's where they started to go over. They came down way too early in 12, back up on the end, and then right off of 13.
Wow.
That's just how it goes sometimes. That was a really rough run. But like you said, they're so young.
Yeah, we may see them here in Oberhof 20 years from now.
We could.
Just swallow that for a second. Okay, comments, questions, welcome by way of Twitter or email. And Detlef is watching today from London, one of 80-plus countries tuning in live today. And he has a number of different questions, but the one I'll point to, with the new women's doubles discipline coming next year for the World Cup, do we expect that the women's doubles will be starting at the same start area as the men's doubles?
I don't know the answer to that, actually. I think there's a lot of questions with the women's doubles field, how that's going to look like, and I don't know the answer yet. So it will be definitely exciting to find out.
Well, Detlef was actually gunning for some controversy here, because if that's the case, then he wants to know, and he quotes Summer Britcher here, why then do women's singles, men and women, start at different places in singles, as we see another sled come down?
I am also a big proponent of that. I think that it's ridiculous that it is 2021 and we're not allowed to start at the same start height as the men. I mean, even if we go into the same curve, they have a bigger ramp than we do. So, I don't know.
I mean,
think
Detlef says it's discrimination, and that bears thinking about. So, and Summer had the great point that, this would be really easy as long as you just start everyone when they're young at the same place.
Absolutely. And it needs to start from that. I think you have to start from the younger sliders and work your way up to it, because from the young age now, the men have trained from higher heights than the women have, and that's just the design of the program. But there, as a youth, when men go from a youth to a junior slider, that's a big leap for them, and there's a lot of bruises, there's a lot of nervous sliders at the top of the hill, but that's a part of learning.
Sure. Well, these two are OK, Taria and Matska from Romania, the first of two Romanian teams, and both of the Romanians and the Ukrainians made it definitely interesting in both heats, as they were the only issues we've seen so far in competition. Now Czech Republic, Vdejek and Pekny, and as a result of being relatively clean, they hold a smooth 9-second advantage over the current leaders. Actually, it's 11 seconds if you're keeping track.
It's going to be, I mean, as long as they have anything close to a decent run, we'll see a change on the leaders board.
18th place finishers last year at the World Championships for this Czech Republic duo. One of many little nations in this sport that do not have their own track. But at least in the Czech Republic's case, the city of Prague is just over an hour away from the Altenburg, Germany track.
They're having a good run so far. Really smooth lines up top, setting them up well for this bottom section. So they're not just having a moderately decent run, they're having a pretty good run. A little bit of an overcorrection off of 13. Too much rollback coming out. Doesn't give them the best setup for Kreisel.
42.164 in the first heat. They're 0.8 of a second slower here. That may be a product of the day moving into early to mid-afternoon, but it also it looked like a clean run, so I'm not sure if there were worse lines being driven there.
I think a lot of it just came from out of 13, but overall, not bad.
All right, we're cruising along pretty quickly here, and that's the trend when you've had a couple of crashes and there's a track hold, especially in run number 2. They'll pick up the pace to stay on time. In particular, at least every other weekend, German TV tends to cover second runs live, especially doubles, where the Germans are almost guaranteed a podium every week. So they may be catching up here to make sure they hit German TV airtime spot on.
Right. These guys they didn't have the best setup in a start curve. They're off to a little bit of a rocky start. But all of that is just time. It's not safety or crazy lines. It's just bleeding a little bit of time.
Green good, red not so good. Your numbers moving on the bottom right if you're new to the sport. Big skid and feet down, but still on the sled.
Right. That was with an entrance into curve 12 like that, it was a nice save. They cut some more ice through Kreisel. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, not a complimentary term, cutting ice, right?
Not in our sport,
yeah.
No. Any friction leads to loss of time. So we're timed to the thousandth of a second. We need every little bit of everything from aerodynamics to the start time to driving. Every variable counts. There's that right wall right before curve 12. They did a great job of catching the line. That could have been a flip off the end like we've already seen.
The Czech Republic leading the way, but the third Ukrainian sled among the first 5 getting ready now at the top, which tells you, if nothing else, that the Ukraine program is developing, it's growing. There aren't a lot of countries that put 3 sleds into one race in doubles luge.
Right. I think that, I mean, if we're giving awards away for this season already, I think most improved goes to Ukraine. I've really been impressed by them. So to see that they have 3 doubles teams in here, the consistency from the sliders has been so much better than I've seen in years past. Like, it's awesome to see.
They do well in singles as well. Manzi and Dukash have had Nations Cup podiums this year in men's singles. Shmaha and Stetskiv, some top 20 results for the Ukrainian women.
And this is a great run so far. It's the best run we've seen going into the second run.
110.3 miles per hour translates to 68.5 miles per hour. Huh? That's 113 kilometers. That would have been fast. Yeah, so Ukraine out in front. In fact, they hold positions 1, 3, and 4 with the Czech Republic in second. Very early action, run number 2 from Oberhof.
And talk about consistency. They were only 400ths off of their first run. So
that's great.
I think that's just showing that the foundation that they're having their performances is really growing to be solid.
The Republic of Korea and their lone doubles entrant Yin Young Park and Young Myung Cho. Top 10 finishers, 9th place at the Olympics they hosted in 2018. As you may have just seen in that graphic, their advantage over the current leaders ever so slight, just 0.004 of a second.
They're off to a better start. You see how his foot really wraps around when he's driving. A lot of different sliders have different styles with how their feet are when they're driving. Ideally, you'd like to see as little movement as possible, just for aerodynamics sake, but I'm really impressed with this team.
Park and Cho ranked number 16 in the World Cup overall standings. The best finish was a 12th. They put down a 13th at the earlier race here in Oberhof last month. Into the lead, 41.666, a quarter of a second up on the field. And that was 0.2 of a second better than their run number 1.
Right, that's great to see.
Still ahead, we have the Canadians and the Americans, each of those North American countries with 1 entry each. And then the Germans and Latvians leading the way after the first heat.
They did a great job of absorbing all of those quick kind of transitions in the labyrinth there. That was a nice run.
Now the Slovakian team of Tomáš Veverčák and Maciej Šmiš. They finished 6th at the Youth Olympic Games in 2016. They've staged 3 Youth Olympics now. Innsbruck 2012, Lillehammer 2016, and Switzerland 2020. And they've been hugely successful.
A little bit of a bump on, and you don't want to see that wave through start curve like they just had. From this start on this track, the start curve is so imperative to building speed for the rest of the track.
Safe 0.2 of a second advantage on the Koreans at that second of 4 splits. The last split being the finish. So they're losing some time as they head towards curve 13 and the important exit.
A lot of pressure into that right wall. It's fantastic save.
Into the lead, 41.648 for the run. Their 2-heat combined time is a 123.368 as they will hold onto their spot. Good showing by the Romanians, or the Slovakians rather. I had that wrong. So this was Romania the whole time. Yep.
Here, right on the start curve, look, they just touch it a little bit early. They come down in the middle, back up on the end. Nice early entrance here into 7. That looks like that's the ideal line.
So Zhitlan and Serban into the lead, and now we have Veverčák and Šmiš. from Slovakia. A little earlier today, we saw Josef Ninis, the Slovakian men's program. And I expect we'll see Katerina Simanikova tomorrow. And if she didn't qualify for the Women's World Cup, it would be one of the rare weekends.
Really close to that right wall into start curve. That's not ideal. You heard a little bit of a skid going through there. It's going to scrub some of their speed. But these guys know how to push back on the sled and really gain as much time as they can after a mistake like that.
So when you mention pushback, is that just a term to stay low, stay down?
Exactly. You're gonna put, when I say pushback, I'm talking mostly about their shoulders into the sled. So when you're really pushed back into the sled, you have a lot more ability to play with the pressures as you're driving.
That's a great point. As they cross the finish line, they should have the lead here, and they do. 123.017. So steering, of course, happens with the shoulders, but it happens with the feet on the kufins. And even a little body lean can make a difference, right?
Absolutely. These sleds are so reactive. They're very sensitive. I mean, you can play with how sensitive you want it to be, but everything from pulling up on a handle to just a slight push of the shoulder or roll of the head is going to influence the direction of the sled. And a lot of athletes, when you make a mistake up top, you really just go for it. There's nothing holding you back anymore, and I think that's what these athletes did in this run.
Slovakia out in front. Two Russian teams in today's competition. This is the Kashkin-Korshunov pair, who finished fourth at last year's World Championships, which were held on their home track in Sochi, Russia. Only two, and it's probably the first time in many years there have only been two entries, as a younger Russian team failed to qualify yesterday in the Nations Cup event.
They look so good on the sled, this team. You really see the experience that they have together. On doubles, you'll often you want to see their heads staying in line the entire way, and this team in particular does a great job with that. That's on the bottom man to really follow the lead of the top man.
Very smooth lines. Let's see how this compares to their first run time, which was 41.363. The ice has held out really well. They're about 700ths up on that, and they have the lead. So they'll look to move up from 15th place, 16th place, perhaps a couple of spots. Splits are tight among the next few sleds.
They are, and that was a pretty solid run. I mean, you saw there had a little bit of a slight direction to the right wall coming out of 13 there. That's exactly where you want to be, but they let the sled go away from the entrance in Kreisel just a little bit, and that little bit makes a big difference in the time. We saw that a lot in the men's race earlier today, so they could have done a better job finishing strong, but overall, a pretty good performance.
Action continuing from Oberhof, Germany. The United States is on deck before they go. It's Team Poland. Wojciech Chmielewski and Jakub Kowalewski. Last year on a historic day in Wittenberg, Germany, they captured their first ever podium. Bronze medal in the doubles competition. The first podium for Poland on the World Cup in 40 years or so.
Right, that was one of the most exciting races from last year to watch and cheer on. It's unfortunate that they had a pretty big mistake in their first run, so they're much farther back than they could have been, and they're just holding it together in this run. They were quite behind in the labyrinth. They're making a lot of really important saves.
Living on the edge, they were a tenth of a second up at that second to last split time. They cross, losing about half of that advantage, but still enough to hang on to their spot. Chmielewski, Kowalewski of Poland into the lead with 14 remaining here in Germany.
If we compare lines between the Russian sled that just came down and the Polish sled, I mean, the the Russians were technically much more correct, but the Polish had so much more speed. Look at that. They hit before 11. The amount of driving that needs to happen to save that and prevent you slipping off the end is so much, and you're cutting so much ice. So to still maintain the lead with that, it's really impressive.
One USA team traveling the World Cup over the past several seasons, as 5 of the doubles athletes for the United States retired after the 2018 Olympics. So here's that team. Chris Master, an Olympic silver medal winner in singles. Jason Turdeman, his brakeman. And they talk about, Emily, of people coming from luge families. Jason turned his family into a luge family as he got involved with the sport, but then both of his parents got involved as race officials.
Right, so the Turdmans have been race officials. They've officiated and led a lot of my races, actually, nationals and World Cups as well. So it's great to see families get involved, and the community. We talk about community, and luge is such a special community. I mean,
line in third, so 41.363. It's going to be construed as a bit of a disappointment for the Americans because they're going to be hard-pressed to finish in the top 15 here. That was after a 10th place finish in their last race and a 12th here last season.
it is definitely disappointing, but it's nice. I mean, it's such a tight race, and it's nice to see the doubles field be this competitive this far throughout the fields.
Team USA done for the day. In fact, Master will have tomorrow off, which is a rarity in the life of a man who competes in both singles and in doubles. Now Team Italy, Emanuel Rieder, Simone Kaidwalter, they're having their best season so far in just their third together as a team, 2 former singles competitors.
I talked about how, in the first run, how Emanuel really loves this track, and he understands the rhythm of this track from his singles career also into his doubles career. But that being said, I think he worked a little too hard in the first run. Comparing it to the other sleds from his team, it was just missing that fluidity. The lines were on. There was a big skid there going into 10. It just seems like he's working a little too hard.
From the Department of So Close Yet So Far, they have 3 top 5 results this year, but alas, no podiums as of yet. As they cross, well, nice run, 41.071 for the heat, and their 2-run time of 122.322 puts them in front.
And that would have been an 8th place run from the first one, so they definitely bettered themselves. But right here, there's going to be a little bit of a skid. Oh, wait, no, actually, this is, sorry, into 7. So that looks pretty good there. But a big bobble off of 13. It's very impressive that they kept it together and they got exactly where they wanted to be heading into Kreisel.
Italy through. That's just the first of 3 different doubles teams from Team Italia. Now the second and final Russian team. And I'm not sure when the last time I remember no Russian double sled being in the top 10 was, but we'll see what shakes here. 12th place after the first heat for Denisov and Antonov.
Their paddles seemed a little bit light. I'd like to see them be a little more forward and a little stronger throughout those. And there was a skid right into start curve. So they're already going to be operating from a deficit on this run.
This team finished 10th at the World Cup here last month. Once again, this is a rescheduled race originally planned for Lake Placid. This has got to be the first time ever, at least since the late 80s, that there was not a World Cup in Lake Placid. Lots of trouble.
Huge issues here. And I mean, this started from right off the bat from the start, and then also again, it really compounded it out of 13 there. I mean, it's great for this Italian team moving up the spot, but that's not the type of performance we want to see on World Cup.
That's the kind of performance, at least today, we've only seen from, say, a 17-year-old. These are among the more experienced Olympic medalists, in fact, in this field.
Right, so the sled got away from them off of 11. It can be very light through there, so they had a big skid going in and then a very high line through 13, and then overcorrection coming out, which only made things worse. But sometimes more experienced sleds will take more liberties with their sled, and they'll really try and push it. So maybe they're pushing things, they give up a little bit of control, and that's why we're seeing this huge mistake from them. It's hard to tell.
Martins Bots and the Roberts Pluma surprised a lot of the luge world last week on their home track with a podium finish, just 19 and 20 years old. But it was maybe a little bit of a surprise, not so much a shock. This is just their first year on tour, but they've been pretty steady. They've had some nice results, including a top 8 in their World Cup opener in Innsbruck.
Right, and if you can go fast in Innsbruck, then that just shows that you truly have speed. And so I'm really happy for this young team that they showed up on their home track and got their first World Cup podium. That's huge.
Quick question.
Early.
Quick question that comes in before we concentrate on the top 10. Our final question: are sleds custom molded for each luger's body, or do you adjust to what is needed?
That's a great question, especially when it comes to doubles. And when we talk about discrimination and discrepancies between the men's field and the women's field that we're going to introduce next year, this is my main complaint with that. So the women's doubles will have a standardized sled. They cannot change the sled. So for doubles, that's extremely important because the shapes of everyone's bodies are different. So when you're putting, the doubles sled, even from within Latvia, so this sled is going to be different than the Six Brothers sled just because the shapes of their bodies are different. So traditionally, they would be very customized, but in the direction that we're moving towards now, for the women's doubles field, you are not allowed to change it.
Interesting. Well, Rito Keinswaldner there on the left. They continue to hold on to the top spot. They've moved up 2 positions in the standings, and with one more sled falling behind them, they will have a top 10 result. Now we make our way to the one sled from Team Canada, Tristan Walker, Justin Sniff. They finished 4th at the 2014 Olympic Games. That was heartbreaking, atoned somewhat with a silver medal as part of Canada's relay team at the 2018 Olympics. Experienced duo, they won the Nations Cup qualifying race yesterday.
They're off to a great start so far. And earlier you saying that their head coach was saying the goal is 2026. These guys are the veterans of the Canadian team now, so.
Yeah, I think he's referring mainly to the singles program, to Reed and Caroline and Trinity.
Okay. They've gotten it back together. I think they've shown a lot of speed this week, but they're labyrinth, and they're all over the place through the straightaway as well. I think once they tune this in and they get control over this new sled, then they will really be a force to be reckoned with. Still be in the lead with a run like that is showing a lot of promise, but they need to show up with the performances now.
Almost an identical time to their first run time, I believe, just separated by 100th of a second. Yeah, it's been hard times for Canada, Emily, because they don't have a lot of depth in the program with a lot of retirements among their perennial superstars, and they've closed that track in Calgary. We loved going there, and that was really the home to most of the lugers. So
right? It's shifting kind of the base over to Whistler now, and so it's a big transition for their whole program. We hope to see Calgary come back, though.
Canada in the lead as we count them down from 9-1 here in run number 2. And from Austria, Yannick Müller and Armin Frauscher. They've had a very solid year. Just their second year together as a doubles team. They've had 3 top 4 finishes, including 2 podiums, second in Innsbruck, third here in Oberhof.
They were both incredibly strong starters as individual athletes, so putting 2 strong individuals on the sled for a start is great.
Yeah, it's a great point, and you generally, almost always, exclusively have the larger guy on the top of a sled, and there's usually a big disparity, but these guys are pretty well matched in size.
Right, and that plays into a lot. I mean, their balance point will be different with that, so it's a unique challenge for the coaching staff to accommodate 2 athletes on the sled that are similar in stature.
Picture perfect exit of curve 13. Now they exit the Kreisel with the lead. Terrific time of 41.000, nearly 2/10 up on the Canadians, and holding on to their spot in the top 9, Müller and Frauscher of Austria.
That would have been a 6th place run in the first run, so that's a great time for these guys to post.
Now, doesn't Frau mean woman in German?
It does.
So Frauscher, I mean, maybe we have women's doubles a year before women's doubles comes to the World Cup. No comment. As
I don't know where to go with that.
it certainly didn't warrant any comment. 3 German teams in the top 8 after run number 1. And here's the 8th place finishing team of Robin Goyaka and David Gam. They had a podium here last year in the World Cup and did not make the national team. Well, they were on the national team, but not the World Cup traveling squad to open up this season. Great to see them back. As I mentioned during run number 1, their place at the World Championships later this month not yet assured by any means. But they can make a case here with a top 5.
Right, another subtle loop through start curve. Their time was fine, but they really could smooth that out just a little bit, and they've already moved into the red, leading into the labyrinth here. Beautiful transition.
Disappointing year last year with the podium here in Oberhof. They're only all season long.
It is, and these guys, I mean, you see in their experience, they're nailing the most difficult transitions on this track, the most challenging sections. Oh, 1,000th, wow.
1,000th of a second, they'll remain in the top 9. They fall back 1 spot on what's already shaping up to be a really good day for Austria as well as Germany. And all I can say on a personal level, Emily, is I hope that Robin and David hang out through the rest of the season, because they're always a lot of fun to have on tour.
Absolutely. I think that they're really just missing a bit of finesse in these upper curves. They, like I said, they nailed the tricky, most challenging sections of the track, but they needed to just smooth out those upper curves just to build as much momentum as they could have, and that would have increased their speed and definitely could have gotten them over 1,000th to maintain their positions.
Only 0.05 of a second separate the team with the lead, Müller and Frauscher, counting all the way down to 6th place. So they could still pick off a few more, and we'll see if the Italians have something to say about that. Ivan Nagler, Fabian Malaya. Up next, the Italian team had an opportunity this year to train in Cesana, which was the site of the 2006 Olympic Games. That's a track that's been closed for 5 or 6 years now, but they still have their start facility there.
Right, and that's a great trip for the team to take, especially during this crazy travel time. They were able to stay in their country, get on ice, and really start honing in their starts again, and it's paid off. I think that I've been very impressed with the Italian starts across all disciplines, and this team in particular has always had a fast start, but to figure out how to maintain that year after year is a skill in its own.
Sort of racing on the edge here, coming off of these corners pretty hard, but keeping it together. And again, they do it out of 13.
Wow, huge correction out of 13 there.
They lose some time, perhaps just from that steering friction. They drop back 2 spots behind the Austrians and the Germans, who continue the lead, separated by just 1,000th of a second.
Wow, this team, I mean, their first run, they were definitely taking the more free approach, letting the sled run as much as possible. This run, they seem to make a lot of corrections right off of curves, right there off of 11. They almost came up off the end. They had so much pressure, putting them right towards that slider's right wall coming out of 13 there. It was a great correction, but like you said, that's what cost them maintaining their position.
Austria continues to lead the way. Earlier today, 2 Austrians ended up on the podium in the men's singles competition. And it's this duo, Mueller and Frausche, continuing to look to the top for the final 6 sleds. 2 of them from Latvia, 2 of them from Germany, another Austrian pair, and 1 more Italian team. Here are the Latvians, Oskars Gudramovic, Vitalis Kalnins.
A little bit of an early entrance in the start curve. You see them pop up on the end a bit.
Slow start to their season, including a 19th place finish on the other race held here in Oberhof, but they've gotten it together over the past few weeks to make their way into the seeded group. Only 9,000ths of a second up at that last split time.
They've had a great setup for the Labyrinth section of the track there, sitting up a little bit out of 11 for good reason, but I want to see them push back and really go for it coming out of 13.
Incredible how tight it is, as they were 4,000ths of a second back. Will it be Austria or Latvia? It's Austria for the moment. The Latvians less than 200ths behind, but 2 spots back. It's Austria, Germany, and Latvia, the top 3, with the final 5 sleds still to come.
They had a great exit of 6 into 7 here, and that set them up really nicely for the Labyrinth, and they saw that. But coming off of 11 there, they had a little bit of extra height on the end, and that definitely cost them some time. I think they had definitely more than 200th right there, so that's where they lost it.
You talk about game of inches. This has been a game of millimeters so far.
It really has been.
200ths. Separating the top 3, 1/1000th of a second separating the top 2 teams. And now we count them down from 5 to 1. The final Italian team, Ludwig Rita, Patrick Rasna. I'm going to beat you to it, Emily. Start record?
I don't know. I think they really showed up in their first run. If they can replicate their first run here, I will be extremely impressed with this team for today.
They have about 500ths of a second to play with. That's nothing. That's their advantage over the Austrians with the lead down below. Let's see this start time. They had a 6.543 in run number 1.
Nice smooth line. And they do. Well done. Well called. Nice call.
They crushed it. 5.22. They took it by 200ths.
And that's huge. I mean, their line was the most level line we've seen through start curve, and that sets them up so well to just really pick up as much momentum in those flatter sections of the track. And they've already opened their lead up to over 2/10.
This is going to be interesting, as they really will need some help to move up in the standings. The biggest gap is between 4th and then this team in 5th, but they've made a case for it, at least, with really the nicest run we've seen all day.
Absolutely. I mean, they did lose a little bit of time to the Austrians in that last split. I think that all comes from their entrance into Kreisel there, but phenomenal job from these 2 today. I mean, they should be extremely proud of this performance.
It's incredible how week in and week out we see new records fall. Now, we haven't had a lot of track records this year, mainly because the temperatures have been well above freezing, at least at the first 4 stops. but start records continue to fall. There are very few that are more than 2 or 3 years old.
Right, and it really is impressive because the amount of effort that goes into all the training outside of what we see here on race day, it's so impressive to see these guys, especially 2 start records in the same race from these guys. That's so challenging to do. To ask that much of your body is so it's awesome to see.
Thomas Stoy and Lorenz Kohler. What a sensational 3 years it's been for them as they broke out onto the scene a couple of years ago with their first race victories. They struggled last year with an injury. Prior to that season-ending injury, they were winning races, and they picked up where they left off to start this year with 3 straight wins, and they still lead the World Cup standings.
They do, and they really went after on that start. They bettered their first start time by almost 2 hundredths. That was a bit of a rough transition there, but they have it back under control, but there was a huge skid.
They had opened it up to 800ths. We'll see if that skid plays out down at the bottom. We won't know the next split until the finish split, and here they come into the lead with a track record bettering anything we saw in run number 1. Remarkable, Emily, what they were able to accomplish down below on what wasn't aesthetically the best run we've seen.
You're right, and I mean, Ludwig, he did hats off to them, and that's exactly what that was. I mean, to find that much time at the bottom of the track, everything was running. Their sled was running, their lines, they were stretched back. They were truly acting as a team.
This is going to be interesting because they trail the podium position, the next sled, by just 1,000th of a second, and they just turned in what was the fastest time of the day.
The pressure is on, and I think you said how many years it has been since Egert Benniken has not been on the podium in Oberhof earlier on. I can't quite remember, but this really is putting the pressure on them if they want to maintain a podium position.
Austria out in front, Thomas Stoy, Lorenz Kohler. Now the final 3 sleds getting ready. And from right here in Thuringia, the central region of Germany, it's the team of Tony Egert, an airplane pilot on top, Sascha Benniken, an amateur musician down below. When they're not doing their hobbies, they're doing the sport of luge, where they've been the best in the sport over the past couple of years on the World Cup. Already.
They were a little bit faster on the start, but very comparable to their first run. They truly need to turn on the speed to maintain their top 3 position. 1,700ths at the last split. Now it is a dead heat. We know how fast the Austrians were down at the bottom. Advantage Austria? I think so, especially with that line. They didn't carry as much pressure into the straightaway as they could have. It's all over.
Mini shocking development as Egert Benniken for the time being are off the podium. Stoy and Kohler continue to lead the way as they look to protect their World Cup overall points lead. And rarely is there a race in Oberhof where Egert and Benniken aren't on the podium. They could still get there, but they'll need help.
They will, but even in this, I mean, you see how much earlier Stoy Kohler was on the curve there in curve 7, and that's just one of the examples of how they had better lines down the track. I mean, Stoy Kohler outslid Egert Benniken in this race.
Sascha Benniken picks up the sled, looks a little forlorn as he walks off the track. Anything other than podiums, certainly a disappointment. They could still end up there as the German team that has the lead after run number 1 waits on deck. Before them, the winners of last week's doubles World Cup race, the brothers from Latvia, Andras and Juris Šīks. The only 4-time Olympians remaining in the sport of World Cup luge at the moment. And 3 Olympic medals among those 4 Olympics.
It's so impressive. But even with that, I think this was the biggest surprise for me from first run. I knew they would be up in top 5, but to be in second position, I'm really impressed with the way that they slid. I hope they can maintain it in this next run.
It's been a great year for them. They're currently fourth in the World Cup standings. They opened the season with a 14th place finish, but they've been top 7 every race since, including the victory last week.
A little bit of a later entrance into 11, but they handle it nicely like the professionals that they are.
Nice exit of 13. This looks good for the Latvians, but it's going to be tight. Austria versus Latvia, and they fall back down at the bottom, where we know how fast Austria was in those final few curves. How did they find that speed? That's the bigger question, Emily.
They did, but I mean, when we talk about Kreisel is so important. We talked about it in the men's race a little bit more than we have in the doubles race, but there's so much time that you can find in that final curve. If you were to stretch out the distance of Kreisel, if you straighten that out, there's so much track in that curve that it's underestimated quite often how much time you can find, and Stoichkoller just did a phenomenal job down there.
Well, the Latvians are done for the day. They are on the podium, which is another great showing. This is their 4th podium performance of the year as they keep on going strong after all of these years. But now this race boils down to one final sled. And will the winner today be Austria, or will it be Germany? That man there is Tobias Wendel. And right behind him, Toby Arlt. They're from Bavaria. That's where the World Championships will take place later this month, but they're looking for a victory here in Oberhof. They had a disappointing 18th place finish the last time out on this track in December. And because of that, they trail 2 other teams in the World Cup standings. And by the way, Emily, Stoy and Kohler have already guaranteed they'll stay on top of those standings at the end of the day, regardless of what happens here.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tight between those top 3 teams. For Wendell Art to come back from the result they had in the last Oberhof World Cup to come out, I hope that they can maintain their leadership position in this and really just show that they're not done yet. They have a lot more to do in their career.
4-time Olympic gold medalists. They had 73 hundredths on the Austrians entering this run. We'll see if they can hang on. It's been a clean run. It's looking good. Speed is terrific. The Tobys from Bavaria, the Bayern Express, lose it at the bottom by 9 thousandths of a second. So for the 4th time this season, Thomas Stoy and Lorenz Kohler capture the gold in a World Cup race.
I did not see that coming. I really thought after their entrance into Kreisel that they were going to come out on top, but 9 thousandths of a second. That is literally a blink of an eye. That's what this race came down to.
Stoy and Kohler are the winners. Still a good improvement for the Tobys after their disappointing 18th here last time out. They end up on the podium again. In fact, they've been top 5 in every race but that 18th.
I mean, they had a really respectable run. There was nothing major glaring out of this run. So it was really a testament of how fantastic of a job Stoichkoller did. They won this race. The Tobys didn't lose it. But overall, fantastic race from all the doubles teams today.
Well, that's the Austrian coaching staff made up of some Olympic medalists in their own right, as Austria has a great tradition in the sport of doubles luge, with the Lingers and Pens Fischler, the Schiegels. It's Austria's day here in Germany, and capitalism luge style, as the rich get richer. The top 6 in the standings were the top 6 in today's race, as Stoichkoller will stay out on top. A rare off the podium for Egert and Bennekin. As for the North Americans, Walker Smith hang on to the top 10, Mazder and Turdeman with the top 15 for the USA.
Wow. I don't think anyone could have called the way that this race was going to go. So thank you to